In this video, I want to go over some basic things that are usually considered chemistry, but they are very useful for understanding things in biology. First of all, let's think about why is chemistry important. Chemistry is usually defined as the study of matter, and living organisms, of course, are made of matter. Now, chemical reactions will change that matter. And chemical reactions are happening inside of living organisms all the time. We are just basically one big chemical factory. You've already learned that the chemical reactions that sustain life are all sort of lumped together and can be called metabolism. And we'll be looking at several of those reaction systems in a little more detail when we talk about energy flow. Now, matter, of course, is the stuff that makes up our universe. Our universe is composed of matter and energy. So matter is the stuff. It has mass and it has volume. It takes up space and we can get some kind of weight of it. Matter also comes in different states. These are also called phases of matter, and I will use both phrases. I'll say states of matter, phases of matter, so you've got to know both of those. And of course, the three most common ones are the solid, liquid, and gas, as you see over here in the pictures of water in each of its different phases or different states. Incidentally, the clouds in this picture are not water in a gaseous state. They're actually solid, little itty-bitty crystals of solid water. But in the air itself, we have water vapor. That's what gives it humidity, and that's water as a gas. Furthermore, matter can be a pure substance, all one thing, or it can be a mixture, several things together. In reality, most of the matter that we see around us is existing as a mixture. That's much more common than pure substances. Even the air we breathe is not 100% oxygen. It's only about 21% oxygen. Most of it is nitrogen, a little bit of carbon dioxide. So most things are a mixture. Now, as I said, the universe is made up of matter and energy. Energy is it's not really stuff, but it is this thing that puts matter into motion. Energy makes things move. Energy comes in two broad categories. It can be actively causing movement, and so that's kinetic energy when the actual moving is happening, or energy can be stored somehow for later use, and we call that potential energy. You probably know from middle school that energy comes in many different forms, and I've just listed a couple here. There's mechanical energy, or the moving of objects physically. There's electrical energy that we use all the time in our devices. Chemical energy, we're going to be talking about a lot in biology because it becomes quite important. Light energy, and of course heat energy. Energy can be stored in chemical bonds between atoms in different substances, and that's where we kind of will tie into it in biology. And that energy in the chemical bonds can be released by chemical reactions. Now, of course, matter itself is composed of a variety of things. We call those things elements. And there is this periodic table that you'll become very familiar with when you take a class in chemistry next year. There are 92 elements that occur naturally, and then we've added a number of others up to number 118 right now, things that we've been able to make in the laboratory that have stuck around for at least a very short period of time. An element cannot be broken down into other substances, so it is kind of the bottom, the foundation. Nothing, a iron, for example, is an element. You can't break an iron apart into anything else. That's as low as you can go. Now, of course, these elements are composed of atoms. The atoms are the smallest particle of an element. And atoms themselves are made of subatomic particles, which I'm sure you're familiar with. We have protons, which carry a positive charge, neutrons, which carry no charge at all, or they're neutral, and then electrons, which carry a negative charge. The protons determine the identity of the atom, so the number of protons you have determines what kind of atom you have. If you have 6 protons, you have carbon. If you have 7 protons, you have nitrogen. So the number of protons is connected to the identity of the atom. And then the electrons are the things that determine what chemical reactions happen. So the electrons are involved in how atoms interact with each other. The protons actually are identifying what it is. The standard picture of an atom is not exactly what it is in real life, but it's close enough for our models. We can see we've got our neutrons and our protons here in the middle, in the nucleus of the atom, and then the electrons are outside the nucleus. They're moving around it somehow, which makes them easily accessible if they're going to be involved in a chemical reaction because they are on the outside. Now, molecules can be combined, or atoms can be combined together into molecules. So molecules have to have at least two atoms, but of course they can have many, many more. There are some very large molecules that we'll be talking about in this unit. If the atoms in a molecule are the same, then it is an element. So that any individual, you don't just need one atom to make an element. An element can be made of a molecule where there's two atoms together. A very common example of this is when oxygen has the two atoms together. So oxygen in the air would look something like this illustration here. Two oxygen atoms bonded together is how we find this element naturally. But if you have two atoms or more that are of two different kinds of elements, then you have a compound. So we've got a picture of a compound here where it's got two of the green atoms and one of the blue atoms, whatever elements they're representing. We get the information on what is in a molecule from the formula, because the formulas are designed to tell us how many of each atom are present. The capital letters, or sometimes it's a capital letter and a small letter, tell you what kind of atom it is, and then the subscript, the tiny number that is below, tells you how many are present in that molecule. So this particular molecule of C6H12O6 you'll become very familiar with because it's glucose and it's one that's pretty important in living things. The formula tells us there are 6 atoms of carbon, 12 of hydrogen, and 6 of oxygen. Because electrons are found on the outside of the atom, they are the part of the atom that is involved in making chemical bonds, and it's chemical bonds that will hold atoms together to form molecules. So the electrons not only are determine what kind of chemical reaction goes on, but they are the things that form those chemical bonds that happen when you have a chemical reaction. There are two different ways that electrons can make bonds. They can move from one atom to the other, and you'll learn a lot more about this next year in chemistry. This forms a type of bond called an ionic bond. But electrons can also be shared between two atoms, and most of the molecules that kind of make us up are ones that have electrons being shared between many, many atoms, and these are known as covalent bonds. Now, electrons don't always make bonds. Sometimes they can just leave one atom and then join another without causing a bond to form in between. Then that atom or molecule has become positively or negatively charged. If the electron, which has a negative charge, walks away from a neutral atom, then it leaves an atom that is positively charged. So we have to start off in this diagram. We have a neutral atom. If it loses an electron, it turns into a positive ion, because charged particles are called an ion, and if it has a more positive, if it's not neutral anymore, it's got a positive charge. Or in the opposite way, if it picks up an excess electron, then it has a negative charge, but it is still just called an ion in general. We do have specific names, cation and anion, to tell you whether it's positive or negative, but you won't need to worry about that this year. Incidentally, when these charged particles or these ions move around, it creates electric currents, and that's very, very important in your nervous system. Some of the ions that you will become familiar with in the course is the sodium ion, which has the atomic symbol Na because the word is in Latin. Hydrogen ion, which makes a little bit more sense because it has an H as its atomic symbol, and of course chloride ion with the atomic symbol of a capital C and a small l. You can see that sodium and hydrogen are both positive ions. They have lost an electron, whereas the chloride ion has gained one and it has a negative charge. One other type of bond that doesn't really happen because electrons are moved, but is very important in biological systems, is the hydrogen bond. Hydrogen bonds are weak attractions between certain molecules, not because electrons have moved from one to the other or that electrons are being shared, but it's more because the molecule itself have areas that are a little more positive and a little more negative. This becomes very important in telling us why water behaves the way it does. Water molecules tend to stick to other water molecules because of the hydrogen bonds that form between these molecules. And this is what gives water its unique properties. For example, the fact that water, when it's frozen, is less dense than when it is liquid, and so ice will float on top of the water instead of sinking to the bottom as most other substances. We're going to be doing a lab looking at the properties of water, and many of the unique properties of water are because of hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds are also very important in holding DNA together in exactly the right way. And of course, DNA is one of the characteristics of life. Things that are living have DNA, and keeping it in the right shape is crucial. Hydrogen bonds make that happen. And finally, a chemical reaction will change one set of chemical substances into something new, and it involves the breaking and formation of chemical bonds. So, as I said, we are one big chemical factory. There are many different chemical reactions going on. We use a chemical equation to explain what happens in a reaction to kind of simplify things. There is an arrow in the middle of a chemical equation, and everything on the left-hand side are what's going in, or the inputs, the reactants, and then the right-hand side is what's coming out, or the products. Other information that is shown on a chemical equation is that if there is a number in front of the formula, it tells you how many molecules of that substance are present. And sometimes we have little letters after the formula, a G or an L or an S, telling you whether it's a solid, a liquid, or a gas. So that's the state of matter of the various chemicals that are in that chemical equation. We won't be doing a lot with chemical equations, but you do need to be able to sort of understand what they're saying, because we will see a few of them. So just to summarize, chemistry really is life. Even though biology is the study of life, chemistry is in there too, because living things are made of chemicals, because chemicals is matter and we are made of matter. Living things need these chemicals to survive. We're not just made of it, but we have to have a constant supply coming into us. And living things depend on various chemical reactions in order to stay alive. So understanding chemistry helps us understand living things. It doesn't take away at all from being amazed at the mystery of life, but it gives us a little bit better understanding of how complex everything really is. This quote is from a Nobel Prize winning biologist from Israel, where he says, "Biochemistry is the science of life. All our life processes, walking, talking, moving, feeding, are essentially chemical reactions." Think about that. We do what we do because of chemistry. So biochemistry is actually the chemistry of life, and it's supremely interesting. I certainly find it so, and hopefully by the time you are done with this class, you'll have a better appreciation for science and for biology, and maybe a little bit for chemistry as well.